All right, so our last lesson in Unit 6. So once again, 6.11 is not going to be in your math books, but it is things that you will probably see on the iLearn and I need to make sure we cover. So we're going to put all these three things that we have been talking about together. So we're going to mix in algebra, we're going to be doing integers, and then we're going to be plotting an inequality. So once again, remembering on algebra, we simply do the opposite function on the side where the variable is, then we do it on the opposite side. When we're doing integer work, we have to make sure that if we have a positive and a negative, that we know how we're supposed to do the adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. And then once we get it all finished, we'll have an answered inequality as to what the variable can be equal to. And then we have to be able to graph it correctly. So I would have all of your handouts that I've given you and we've gone over available to you so that you can look at them as you're working through these. I'm going to work through most of these. We will skip 3 of them just in case you have questions and you're not sure. And I will be there to help you and work through them. So we're going to start with number 1, where we have a divided by 2 is less than 15. So once again, going through how we do algebra is we locate our variable. That's where we have to start. And when I find my variable, I know I have to get it alone. So then I'm asking myself, what am I doing to the variable? What am I doing to a? Well, it's a over 2, and we know that fractions are division. So I know that I'm dividing by 2. And that opposite function is, instead of dividing by 2, we're going to multiply by 2. So in order to get rid of it, I'm going to multiply the variable side by 2, which allows me to cancel the 2's out. That's going to leave me with a is less than. So now I have my variable alone. So then, since I have my variable alone, I have finished step 1. Now I go to step 2. And step 2 tells me to do whatever I did to get my variable alone. I'm now going to do it on the opposite side. So I'm going to take 15 and multiply it by 2. And on your handy dandy calculator, you can find that 15 times 2 is equal to 30. All right, so we did algebra and we solved our inequality, but now we have to graph our inequality. So when I'm looking at it, I'm going to ask, can A be equal to 30? In this one, that answer is no. So I'm going to circle where the 30 will be. Then I need to ask, can A be less than 30? Well, the arrow is pointing to the A, and I know the arrow always points to the smallest number. So yes, indeed, it can be less. So I know I'm going to draw the arrow to the left. And then I have number 1 completed. So then we go to number 2. Number 2, if I was reading it, says 30 is greater than or equal to 3 times f, or 3f. Remember, any number touching a variable, that would be a coefficient and a variable together, means to multiply. So we go through our exact same steps. I know I need to get my variable alone. What am I doing to the f? Well, I'm multiplying by 3. So in order to get my variable alone, I have to do the opposite of multiplying by 3. The opposite of multiplying by 3 is dividing by 3. So on the side of the variable, I'm going to divide by 3, which simply allows me to cancel those out. Now I'm left with my inequality sign and my f. I have my variable alone. So now step 1 is done and I go to step 2. Step 2 tells me to do the exact same function on the opposite side. So opposite function, opposite side, I'm going to divide 30 by 3. And when I divide 30 by 3, I know that 3 will go into 3 once, which gives me a 0 remainder. Some of you messed this up on your last week work, so make sure that when you are dividing, if you bring something down, you have to bring something up. So some of you would have ended up with 1 on your assignment last week. Make sure you end up with 10 because that 0 is holding a place value. So I know it's equal to 10. All right. So now as I'm looking at it, I have to go through my inequality questions. Can f be 10? Yes, it can, because it has the 10 is greater than with the underline, which tells me it can be equal to. So I'm going to plot it, and plot it once again tells me I'm going to put in a filled in circle where the 10 is. All right, can it be less than 10? Well, this arrow is pointing to the variable of f, so yes, indeed, it can be less than 10, and if that's a yes, I know I'm going to draw and shaded my arrow going to the left. All right, so we've got 2 done. All right, and so now let's look at question 3. If I was reading this inequality, it says that b plus 10 is greater than or equal to 6. Well, once again, I have to go to step 1 and I have to get my variable alone. So what am I doing to my variable of b? Well, it says I'm adding 10. And therefore, I have to do the opposite function to get my variable alone. And the opposite of adding 10 is subtracting 10. So once I subtract 10 and I get rid of those, I'm left with my variable and I'm left with my inequality sign. Okay, so step 1 is done. Now step 2 tells me I need to do that on the opposite side. Here's what I need you to remember always and forever. Whatever I'm carrying over on the other side of my equal sign or on the other side of my inequality sign, it must always go to the right of the number that's already there, always and forever. So I end up with 6 minus 10. This is where we get into our inequalities lesson, right? So if I know that I have inequalities possible in my lesson, I would show that both of these are positive numbers so I can go through my steps. My steps then are, can I subtract integers? And that answer, once again, is no. So my subtraction becomes addition. Then I change my sign to my second number. Now what I have is 6 plus a negative 10. Can I add my integers? Yes. Do I have the same sign? No. So I'm going to keep the sign for the largest number, right? 10 is bigger, so I know my answer has to be a negative number, and then I simply subtract them. 10 minus 6 is 4. So we find out that b is greater than or equal to negative 4. All right, so then I go through my graphing my inequality questions. Can it be negative 4? Yes, it can because it is underlined, so I know I'm going to plot it. Once again, that means since it can be it, I'm going to put a circle and fill it in. Can it be less than negative 4? Well, the arrow is pointing to the negative 4. The arrow always points to the smallest number, so that's a no. Therefore, can it be more than negative 4? Yes, because the bigger part of the arrowhead is where the variable is, has to be bigger, so I know I'm now going to draw my arrow going to the right. All right, so let's check out number 4 then. Now, all right, so let's go through another integer question with our inequality. Now, our algebra steps are always going to be the same, right? I have to locate my variable and do the opposite function on the opposite side. When I locate my variable, I have a g. What am I doing to the g? Well, I'm multiplying by 9. The opposite of multiplying by 9 is dividing by 9. So I'm just going to show on the side of my variable that I'm dividing by 9, and then I'm going to cancel those out. I'm good to go. I've done step 1. So I bring down my variable, and I bring down my inequality sign. I have my variable alone. So now I've done step 1. I go to step 2. Now I'm going to go to the opposite side. I'm going to divide by 9. Now I notice that I have a negative 108 divided by 9. That's an integer question. So our very first lesson on integers was, can I multiply and divide integers? Yes. First step, do the math. Then we talk about the sign. So I'm going to divide 108. Top number always goes inside the box. Divided by 9. 9 goes into 10 one time, which is 9, and I have 1 left over. Bring down the 8, and 9 goes into 18 2 times. So I know that 108 divided by 9 is 12. Now, I look at my signs. The 9 doesn't have a sign, so once again, I always suggest you go ahead and show that it's a positive so that you can tell the next step that you need to go through. When I identify that I have 2 of my integer signs, I ask, are they the same sign? Nope. Since I don't have the same sign, I know the answer has to be negative. So I have g is less than or equal to negative 12. Now I go to my graphing questions. Can it be negative 12? It can be because the integer sign is underlined. Therefore, I'm going to plot negative 12 with a solid circle. Can it be less than 12? Negative 12, excuse me. Yes, because the arrow is pointing to the G, and the arrow always points to the smallest number. Therefore, since it's a yes, I'm going to draw my arrow going to the left. All right, so then we're going to skip 5 and 6. I'm going to use those in case you have questions, you want some additional help. You can come to us. I'm also going to skip number 8. That's going to be there for extra help as well. So let's do number 7 before we get into 9 and 10, which changes things up a little bit. So number 7 says that I have negative 5, which is less than 1/2 times d, or 1/2 d. Once again, a coefficient and a variable touching means multiplication. So when I look at my d, I'm asking what I'm doing with it. I am multiplying d by 1/2, therefore I have to divide by 1/2. Now when I divide by 1/2 where the variable is, that's pretty easy, I just cancel it out. However, once I get through step 1 and I get my variable and my inequality sign alone, now I have to do it on the opposite side. Now, when I'm going to do it on the opposite side, once again, I see my negative 5. I'm going to have to slide it over because when I go to the opposite side, whatever math I'm carrying over, I have to put to the right of the number that's already there. So we slide that negative 5 over, followed by divided by 1/2. Can I multiply whole numbers and fractions? Can I divide whole numbers and fractions? No. So I have to make my whole number over 1. Then I ask, can I divide fractions? No, I have to KFC it. So I'm going to keep my first one. I'm going to flip my second one. So instead of 1/2, I'm going to have 2 over 1. And then I have to change my division to multiplication. Now I ask, can I multiply fractions? Yes. How do I do it? Multiply across. So when I'm multiplying integers like I have in my numerator, I just simply do the math and then ask about the integer sign. 5 times 2 is 10. 1 times 1 is 1. When I look at the signs then for my numerators, I have a positive and I have a negative. Therefore, since opposite signs, I know it has to be negative 10 over 1, which is just the same as negative 10. Once again, I ask my inequality questions. Can d be equal to negative 10? No, it cannot be. Therefore, I'm just simply going to circle my negative 10. Can it be less than negative 10? Well, the arrow is pointing to the negative 10, so that's as low as I can go, so that answer is no as well. Can it be greater than negative 10? Can it be more? Absolutely yes, because it's on the bigger side of the arrow. Therefore, D has to be bigger than negative 10. So I'm going to shade in my arrow going to the right. All right, so let's go to 9 and 10. So you'll notice at the end of this lesson that I do have an extra video on the slideshow, but also available to you on Canvas. And it's a guy by the name of Mr. J. It's not Rob on Math Antics, but he still does a nice job as a teacher explaining these things. But we find out when we're doing inequalities and solving for them through algebraic steps that if I have integers, that when I multiply or divide by an integer, my sign has to flip, right? So that's what the stars are for. And if you look at the footnote on your paper, you'll see that I have that note there. But it's still all going to start the same way. I still am going to go through my algebraic steps. I locate my variable. I ask what I'm doing to my variable. Well, I'm dividing by a negative 5. So if I'm dividing by negative 5, the opposite function is to multiply negative 5. So I show that I'm multiplying by negative 5 and I cancel those out. That gives me my variable and my inequality sign. Right? Step 1 is done. Now, when I go into step 2, this is where I have to remember this extra process. If I go over to the opposite side and I multiply or divide by a negative number, then I have to flip the direction of my arrow. It must turn in the opposite way. So instead of adding or subtracting where it stays, now I'm going to be multiplying by negative 5, which tells me my arrow can't point to the left anymore. Since I'm crossing over to the opposite side and multiplying or dividing by a negative, now I've got to flip my arrow. So make sure you show that you're flipping your arrow on your paper. Then I can go through and finish up on the opposite side. So now I end up with 5 times negative 5. Well, once again, multiplication of integers, I do the math and then I ask the questions about their signs. So 5 times 5 is 25. And then I notice that the first 5 is positive, the second 5 is negative. I have opposite signs, so I know I have a negative 25. So C, notice we flipped the arrow, so now it's saying C is greater than or equal to negative 25. Can it be negative 25? Yes, it can. So I know I'm going to plot it. Can it be less than negative 25? Well, no, because now that the arrow has changed, the arrow is pointing to the negative 25, which is the smallest that we can go. So now with the arrow change, the bigger part of the arrow is faced towards my variable, so I know that C has to be more than negative 25. So I'm going to draw my arrow from the negative 25 plotting all the way over to the right. All right, so let's try 10. So on 10, now we have 8 minus k is less than or equal to 13. Got a couple things we're going to be reviewing here. So remembering that we look at our k first, right? So if I have 8, well, that's a positive 8, right? So that means that I'm adding 8 to a negative k. Seems kind of weird, but we'll get to that in just a moment. So I just need to remember that it's a positive 8, which means I'm adding 8. So the opposite to get rid of it is subtracting 8. That cancels it out, and I bring down my variable, my negative sign, and my inequality sign. Now, when we're looking at these, when we start getting into step 2, I go to the opposite side, and I'm going to subtract by 8. That doesn't really change anything because 13 minus 8 is just 5. Notice I've got a negative k. So one of the rules is I can never have a negative variable. So I need to remember that any variable without a coefficient has that understood coefficient of 1. So really what we're saying is that I have negative 1 times k is less than or equal to 5. Therefore, this is going to be a two-step algebraic equation because I have to get k alone and being positive. So if I'm multiplying by negative 1, now I'm going to divide by negative 1, and that's going to cancel those out. And if I'm going to divide by negative 1 on the opposite side, I have to flip my arrow. It has to now point in the opposite way so that I can divide by negative 1. Well, once I get that set up, I just simply do the math. I bring down my k and I bring down my arrow now pointing to the right and underlined. And then I have 5 divided by 1, which is 5. And then since they're opposite signs, a positive and a negative, it has to be negative 5. So we should end up, since we had to show that we had that understood coefficient of negative 1, and we divided by negative 1, now my arrow has to point to the right. Make sure you do that. Because therefore, when I go to plot it on my graph as an inequality, my arrow is now pointing in the right direction. So I can ask, can k be negative 5? Yes, it can. So I know I want to plot a complete circle at negative 5. Can it be less than negative 5? Well, the arrow is now pointing to the negative 5, so that's going to be a no. Therefore, can it be greater than negative 5? That answer is going to be yes. So I'm going to draw an arrow to the right. Now, the reason we went through these two is because there were some people on the standardized test over the past couple of years that have gotten this far, and they've been asked these questions, and I don't want you to be completely lost and confused. All right, so I'm not going to be using a whole lot of negatives and flipping or inequality signs, but I want you to know what it's talking about. All right, so on this particular video, this is Mr. J, and he goes through 4 different problems explaining the first 3, how we do the steps. But then on the 4th one, he shows that we have to flip the sign when we're multiplying or dividing by a negative. All right, so less than 20 minutes once again, as I'm trying to do, and therefore you have your worksheet that you can come and get after you show me that you have completed your notes. If you have any questions, please ask us. That's why I left those extra 3, and we're here for your assistance.